Hey there, you podcasting badasses. It's your host, Sober Steve, the podcast guy, here with another excellent episode of Podcasting Badass. This week, we are going back to the basics as I talk Brianna through a broad overview of podcasting from start to finish in this week's brainstorm episode. I talk her through what it's like defining your ideal listeners for your show, the pros and cons of deciding between an ongoing show and a limited series. And then we back up and demystify what happens from the moment you hit record to the moment the world is downloading your amazing content for those who might not have been podcasting already and are confused over what happens when you stop recording that first episode or that trailer. So this is a great episode, whether you're new or old podcaster. There's lots of great tidbits to help you become a podcasting badass. Before we head on over to the interview, though, I want to make sure you remember to hit follow on your screen wherever you're listening so you can get new episodes each and every Monday. If you have a podcast you'd like to start or grow and monetize, reach out to me at sobersteve.com, SOBERSTEVE.com for a free one-on-one chance to be on Podcasting Badass for a brainstorming or a tune-up episode of your own. Until then, enjoy the episode. Hey there, podcasting badasses. It's your host, Sober Steve, here with Brianna, owner of Hummingbody. Welcome to the show, Brianna.
Hey, thanks for having me.
And tell me a little bit more about what Hummingbody is, because I'm sure that will come into play with your podcasting goals.
Yes, so it is a new startup business just this year, and I'm an integrative somatic practitioner, also a licensed social worker. I do some trauma coaching, some boundary coaching, and then I do biodynamic breath work, meditation, mindfulness. And it's usually for people that are chronically stressed, find themselves in chronic toxic relationships, in a state of overwhelm, burnout. And so usually a lot of that has to do with either some kind of past trauma or boundaries that we're not keeping and withholding. And it's mostly virtual. And I'm very excited. I've had a few clients so far and I love it.
Excellent. I love the idea of being able to help heal people. I'm huge into that, and having people who know what they're talking about is great, as well as being able to reach people online, because that breaks down
Mhm.
so many barriers to connect with people that
Yeah.
have the uniquely qualified experience that you normally might not be able to find in small rural areas. That's great.
Mhm.
And I can list and talk all day long about the reasons why anyone should start a podcast, but what inspired you or has you interested in podcasting?
I've been listening to podcasts here and there. I'm not a huge listener, but some of the more casual ones, like I want to say maybe like really simple ones, I'm like, I could do that. And I have a lot to say about this and this topic from experience and also professional or educational realms as well. It would just be fun. You can do them like 15 minutes, but yeah, I really have to try. I want to spread the word on some things.
Yeah. I love that you are the second interview that I've done today that mentioned 2 hour long interviews. It was a client earlier, but they mentioned like they couldn't have that. I was like, where are these podcasts with 2 hour long interviews? I know one or two exist, but most are relatively short. So I love that. With podcasting, who would you say, knowing that your ideal listener for the podcast is ultimately going to be your ideal client for your business? What does your ideal client look like to you right now?
Right now, it's mostly women ages 30 to 45. Some men are in traumatic relationships and overwhelmed too, but mostly geared toward women. But I also minored in women and gender studies. So I work with everyone. And then also some kids as well, elementary school age.
Okay.
So that would be most of the audience.
Like knowing that then having the business that can then go in one of those three different directions, or sometimes I'm sure that there is overlap at times as well. But if you were to choose one of those as your primary focus for the podcast, it is very helpful when speaking to listeners to be knowing who it is you're speaking to, or like to speaking to one more as specific as you feel comfortable getting.
Yeah. So you're asking which one of those audiences I would want to cater to?
Does one like speak to you as not necessarily that it has to be the women only podcast where we're only going to talk about women
Yeah. Yeah.
issues,
Like adults
but
versus children?
yes, something like that, or using like more maybe female verbiage, but make it more inclusive where it could be for men as well. But it's very hard to have a podcast that's for everyone about a very large topic because when we're looking for podcasts, we want to find one that like speaks to us directly. And
Mhm.
so
Mhm.
it's your niche
I
because
agree.
it's great when you can, when even for me, it's not necessarily anyone who wants to start a podcast, but like a certain approach that I call like the badass approach. But it's this, not every single person is going to be right for every single podcast. That's why there's so many
Right.
podcasts about overcoming and healing trauma. And there's so many podcasts about
Yep.
podcasting and there's so many podcasts out there. But the difference is that most of them fail within 8 episodes because the people give up because they didn't manage their expectations or didn't know what they were
Mhm.
doing. My biggest kind of tip for anyone starting a podcast is you want to know exactly who it is that you're podcasting for, like the who, what, when, where, and why of what your show is
Yeah.
for, who it is that
Well,
you're speaking to.
it's mainly for women.
Hmm.
However, I'm just getting the idea now that like, how are there even many podcasts for kids?
Yeah.
Really, my idea right now is for the women,
Yeah.
but my mission is all based on childhood sexual abuse prevention. It would be more like coping and life skills and how to breathe and cope in your family and stuff like that. Make boundaries. What's body safety? What's consent? So all those kinds of things. That'd be so fun. Really would. But I'm going to try to do that with all the women that didn't learn it when they were kids.
Yeah. And it would be awesome to frame it like that. That would be a very specific niche where you know exactly who it is that you're talking about.
Mhm.
And does that need
Like a series on that kind of thing, right? Is that
correct.
right?
So if
Yeah.
you were to write it out as like a limited series, we're going into it when you're recording episode one, hey, it's going to be these 12 episodes or these 24 episodes and have a story arc of this is the message that I want to tell from A to Z. You, it's great for businesses, especially as you're getting started up, because what you then have is like a lead magnet that almost is
Mm,
like an orientation for your
right.
future clients so that people who are
Oh,
starting to do research into overcoming, or if someone's researching and trying to find advice for overcoming childhood sexual abuse for women and they find your podcast and it is like a 12 episode series of everything you need to know about overcoming sexual abuse and trauma for women, and then have people who are looking for that help find it, they listen to this free 12-part series. You're plugging your business at the beginning and end of it, and at the end
right.
they can either get the free value and be a big fan who will follow you on social media and love everything you do forever, but will never pay a penny because they're just freeple and that has nothing to do with you.
Right.
But you'll also find your
People.
ideal clients too. You'll also find your clients who will be willing to invest in learning more and connecting with you and saying, hey, now that I'm familiar with these 12 concepts that you live by, tell me how I can apply them to my life because I want to meet with you one
Mm,
on one to talk about what I'm struggling now. And that's what
mm,
they'll get from you after listening to the episodes is them learning the education, but then the healing happens with you,
right. Right.
is how I might
That
consider doing
sounds
it
good.
if you were to try and do it. Because a lot of times as well, having it be knowing that you're going to have a start, middle, and end helps people as well.
Mhm.
If you're worried about the
Mhm.
how, feeling like you don't have to commit to doing it forever. And
Well,
then you just use that as
you
your lead magnet.
what if say you wanted to do like a series, say like you said, for example, 12 or whatever, but then you wanted to do another series, but that would still be your podcast. It would just be how do you speak to that? A series for women and like series for men.
If you were to do that, I would, what that, to go back a couple steps and we'll get there, I promise. But so when
Sure.
you make the podcast, you put it, so let's say you start your show, you record your trailer and your episodes. We'll put it out to Apple, Spotify, YouTube, everywhere people listen to podcasts, and they can listen to the trailer as well as your episodes. That is tied generally from an RSS feed that's tied to that one specific show. So if you were to do a limited series designed specifically towards women overcoming childhood sexual abuse, and then 6 months later or a year later or even a week later, but you want to do a different show about something else, it would be better to make a new limited series for that specific thing if it's a different thing, because you're not going to find people that will listen to both shows generally if it's for
Mm,
two different audiences. But
mhm.
when you have more than one podcast and you're putting your name and your branding as this is the host and this is the company, Humming Body, then when you click on those things in the apps, it does show you all the other person's shows that they do. So
Mm.
people can find you and find like from one show to the other. They can click over from one to the next, and you can recommend your
I
own
see.
show as recommended. So they could be tied together as a network at that point, or
Uh-huh.
like a group of shows. But I would definitely recommend having them have separate RSS feeds. There was a comedian that like I love to death, Nicole Byer, but she did like this like awesome series on like Marvel movies that I was like totally obsessed with. But then she did a completely different set of movies for later on seasons. So that's something that I wasn't so hot for. And it was just
Mhm.
so frustrating seeing these things that I didn't like. And so I unfollowed the show, and I don't know what she went and did later down the road for other seasons, because I unfollowed at that point and left altogether because they were
Yeah,
releasing content in my stream. So
I
you wouldn't
see.
want to mix your two shows or do a
Mhm.
season for women and then do a season for men and then do a season for teens like in one feed,
I
because
see.
it would get very confusing for the listeners
Mhm.
because they would get the mixed messages and depending on where they tuned in. I still have someone like finding
Right.
my show to listen to all the episodes. So they'll go back, and if things are changing, it's confusing.
Makes sense.
All right. And then with podcasting, whether you do a limited series or you're doing it week after week, when you get into that routine, the way that routine looks like is you can record the episode all together in one sitting. Sometimes I know professionals who will sit in their studio once a month for an hour and record a month's worth of content and then send it over to their
Mhm.
podcast guy, and then that podcast person does all the editing and splicing and puts it into the 4 different episodes, uploads it, gets all the social media clips and everything prepared and scheduled for them. So all they really realistically going, once they have everything set up the way that they like to, it'll only be like that 1 hour a month of them doing their creativity. And then they leave it up to their editor and producer.
No.
But you also have some people that rather than wanting to pay someone or invest in that time like that financially, they'll rather invest in it with their time and their energy, learning how to do the editing, learning how to do the social media and the branding, learning how to do the posting and the show notes and the tags and everything. So I always tell people in terms of the podcasting, there's the shortcuts that you can get for people that are wanting to get there sooner. I spent 2 years before I got traction, but my first year I did everything wrong. And it's because I was doing research. I was listening to 8 different podcasts. So I was getting conflicting information and different advice. And
Right.
I was
Yeah.
looking at all the different
Yeah. I know
resources
about
that I
that.
can get while trying to spend as little as possible. And then I ended up spending way more than I would have spent if I just hired an expert at first, because I kept on buying these things
Mhm.
that I didn't need, or the software that didn't work, or this hardware that went wonky
Yeah.
just after the exchange policy. But at the end of it, I learned how to do it and it started gaining traction.
Right.
So that's an overview of podcasting and like the broadest strokes of it's you record your episode, you edit the episode, you upload it, you post it, and then you promote it.
So if I wanted to just say I wanted to make a podcast this afternoon, what would I do? And just hit record, and then even if I saved it just for myself, like how would I do
Mhm.
that? And how do you just start it?
For it to turn into a podcast, after you record the audio file, you'll want to then put it into an RSS feed, which is what a podcast goes into that makes it a podcast. So the one that I will always recommend and again have from the beginning is BUZZ Sprout. It's affordable with no sort of hidden tricks, has great customer service, has sent me to podcasting conventions on their
Oh,
dime
cool.
just to help me grow my show. I've loved Buzzsprout forever. They are great. But there are other ones. There are ones that are known for they'll start off free when you have no listeners, but then when your show gets successful, next thing you know, you're paying 5 times what you would pay if you just were paying the $12 a month. And from there,
Mhm.
in that, you put what your show name is, what your cover art is, what your description of the show is, the keywords and tags that people will search to be able to find it. You do have set all of that up so that people can know what you're looking for. And then you upload your content, your episodes once they're edited. You then post it. What, what I recommend most is have the first episode be your trailer as your preview to get you listed,
Mm.
because getting listed in a lot of the apps takes about a week. You can't just all of a sudden say today, hey, I'm going to be on Apple Podcasts by the time I go to bed tonight. Once you get Buzzsprout set up, then you have to push it to Apple saying, hey, please start looking for my stuff as I release it. And you have to do that first. And there's a whole backend setup system you have to do. Or again, hire someone to do it for you. But you get that taken care of. You set it all up and so that it's linked and posted with your email address and user IDs and accounts for all of these different websites and apps that it will be connected to and go out to. That way it goes everywhere. Because if you only do it on Spotify because you don't want to spend the 2 or 3 hours setting it up everywhere else, then you're only going to be getting one fraction of the listeners you can get if you post it everywhere.
Yeah.
So I always
Yeah.
tell people, post it everywhere. It does take time, but it's worth it in the end because that's where people will find your content. So why not put it everywhere so people can find it everywhere? Once it gets approved, then as you are releasing these episodes and scheduling them and pushing them out, they'll release within an hour or so window of when you request. So if you say, I want my episode to come out Thursdays at 3 and you schedule it for the next 3 weeks, it'll show up between 3 and 3:20, 3:30 in most people's podcasting apps. And then you post about it.
Yeah, right.
So what would you say out of this conversation of podcasting A to Z was your biggest takeaway?
I just thought it was helpful to be able to talk it through with someone.
Yeah, for sure. Consistency is definitely the key with podcasting, but once you find your flow, it becomes part of your routine. All right. It's been a pleasure, Brianna. Thank you so much.
You too.
Yeah. Thanks, listeners, for tuning in to another episode of Podcasting Badass. I will see you next Monday for another episode. Until then, keep on podcasting.